Hey guys, Jiggy here with you for the second part of Size Does Matter. I am going to save you the gay stuff for this one and just go with the actual footage of my session. Everything is explained in there, so just enjoy it. I think this is a pretty good one, actually. I really like that one. Some really deep, interesting stuff in there. Hey guys, Jiggy on the mic. With you for the second part of Size Does Matter, part 2. Um, in this one is going to be a 2-4 live session, 3 tables plus the replayer as the 4th table. And what I want to do in this one is I actually want to give you some guidelines to be able to recognize the spots where you have to vary your bet sizing, where you have to differ from your standard bet sizing. Sorry, because before like giving some examples of spot where it is good to overbet or it is good to underbet or to bet pot or to do whatever basically, uh, I want you guys to understand the whys of those kind of things, because if I just give you examples, there's a good chance that you will end up not even being able to recognize the spots when they do arise in your own games. Uh, so I like to, like I said, give you some reasons why it's gonna be good, why and when it's gonna be good to vary your bet sizing. So I'm gonna go over like more theoretical stuff while I play. I'm gonna talk about hands that are actually happening, but when I don't have much to do, I'll just uh, talk about theory on bet sizing, and it's gonna be one part. So I hope it turns out good, and I hope I do get some things to talk about. I've sat at those tables for like 10-15 minutes, not much happening for now. I don't have any reads basically on anyone, except that the tables pretty much look like they're filled up with regs, which is a good thing, I think, for a video. It should be more interesting than if playing just against fishes and stuff. So let's go ahead and do that. What I did is I actually made a list here of reasons to vary your bet sizings. This one, I'm gonna peel one actually. I could really well have an ace there, so I don't mind. It's not the kind of board that many players are gonna two barrel so often with a bluff, so I think I could peel one and fold the turn pretty profitably there. And there's basically no point in betting the turn, I think, here. I could do so as kind of sort of value. I think it's way too thin. Uh, I'm actually gonna bet the river because I think if he has something like jacks to kings, he's less likely to bet the flop, and he would probably bet the like turn, not turn, but probably river quite some time to get something value. So I'm gonna try to look like I just have a busted flush draw by betting small here and hoping that he calls with like king eye or something like that, which I think is not impossible. And I don't really expect him to play an ace that way really often. So I think it's pretty easy value bet there. Even though I don't get called that often, I think I have the best and pretty much always. So, and I don't check raise, get check raise a lot, so no big deal. Uh, but yeah, I've made a list of reasons, like I said, as to when and why you want to go for different bet sizings than like your usual 2/3, 3/4 of the pot. I don't know how you play, but you probably do take those sizing as your usual bet sizings because pretty much everyone does that, and it's perfectly fine. actually. And before I start talking about this kind of stuff, I just want to put a warning that spots where you can profitably overbet and underbet and I don't know, do some really tricky sizings are not that frequent actually. Well, you can do it every single hand if you want to, but it's likely that those are not gonna be good spots, and you're just gonna look dumb. So recognizing the spots and recognizing the right situation is just as important, if not more important, than being able to pull the trigger. And to be able to recognize the situations, you have to work first on hand reading and people reading and being able to assess the right thinking process to the right opponent. Like, have a good idea of what's your opponent's poker IQ, basically, which is a term that I like to use a lot when I'm trying uh, to get reads on player and to assess reads on player, basically. How far are they thinking, and how far are they in their in their poker mental career, basically, if that makes any sense. So enough with all of the talking. I'm going for pretty small here because I think when he checks that flop, uh, it's either to, as the original raiser, when he checks that, it's either just to check fold, no matter what happens, basically, so you don't need to bet big for sure, or it is to like check call once with like ace high, or try check call down with ace high or like sevens or stuff like that, which is a possibility. But I think firing out small on the flop is gonna show profit, and I do present stuff like middle pocket pair, and I could have nine as well, so I don't get playback. I can't like he can't go ahead and play back at that bet profitably if he has nothing at all. So I think it's kind of spot where you do have to be aggressive when the original raiser basically stops showing any sort of uh aggressivity. Here with the backdoor top two pairs, I think this spot where I have to solo play first because I there's that guy that I want to keep in the hand and put in as much money as possible. And when I raise that, I mean I'm not raising that flop with many semi bluff combos or bluffs for what it's worth. So I prefer balancing my range by because I think I'm against good hand readers here because I think they're regs. Uh, I do want to be at least somewhat balanced so that I don't like I just don't turn my cards face up. Here I'm gonna play like to the river, up to the river. I'm gonna play stuff like ace queen and ace jack and ace nine, ace eight suited exactly like that. So I'm don't always have a big hand, so I can get paid off. But the jack on the river is a very bad card for a couple of things. First, Chucky here could really well have ace jack, especially with kind of timing he took on the river before checking. It was a kind of timing of someone who just rivered two pairs. It's like, oh, should I bet here? Oh no, I'm just gonna check. And I could very well myself have ace jack. So if I shove, I don't think I ever get a call by ace queen or ace king there by Pucci. Ever. I think it's actually a check back. I'm beating that guy. I hope he doesn't have ace jack. And I'm fine. I just don't think I ever get called by worse here because I represent so strong. Just because there were so few draws on the flop. Basically, I can't seriously with the jack like getting there on the river. The very worst hand that I can shove the river with for value is like ace 5, so I only get called by ace 10 against someone who actually has a brain. If those were fishes, that would be different. But here, since I'm actually, when I shove the river, I actually have the bottom of my valuing range, and I have basically no bluffing range whatsoever, uh, which is something that they should realize if they're any decent at hand reading. With the jack getting there, I did not float, flop, and turn with nothing at all. I probably have ace something, and if I shove here, it is very likely to be like ace jack. And I could have fives and I could have tens as well. So, like, for me to be bluffing there, and for someone to, like, if he has ace king there, for him to be able to hero call me there with his ace king, he'd have to put me on like ace egg, that is turning his hand into a bluff, which is really really unlikely. It's just kamikaze plan basically. So yeah, that was good. Coming back on that one, what I want to talk about is that I'm gonna go through basically certain levels of what you are trying to accomplish every time you size a certain amount for your bet. Uh, First thing, which is true on every single hand, is that you always want to charge a certain price. You don't want to get, when you decide to bet, you often don't want to get uh, like drawn out by some random cards, which is why you don't like min bet every street in a big pot, which is why like the 2/3, 3/4 line is always pretty good to charge a good price for some weaker hands that you basically want them to go away because you're not getting any value anyways and you don't want to get outdrawn basically. So this is something that is gonna take care of itself. When you're gonna change that is spots where you're against a bad player that you suspect is on a draw, like a flush draw, and you suspect that you will call pretty big bets without even looking at your bet basically just because he wants to draw. Those are spots where you're gonna vary your bet sizing according to that reason. You're just gonna pot with like top pair if you think your opponent is on a flush draw, because I don't know, like, he likes to call pretty quick his flush draws on the flop, so you know that on the turn he's most likely to be on that. You just pot it because I think you think there's more value to be won with that way. So, but most of the time, this reason is gonna take care of itself. And what I want to illustrate is that all those reasons, uh, they're in order basically of like the higher the reason, the worse your opponent, and the like this one is like level 0 thinking, and this one is like level a lot thinking. It's a lot of poker thinking, and all in between, every reason in between, all that you want to take care, all that you want to think about, and like that reason to vary your bet sizing is most likely to include all of those reasons as well. I'll try to get that a bit clearer because it's still uh, not that clear in my mind, if that can reassure you. Second reason to manipulate the stack sizes. This is something that you want to do no matter if you're against a fish or you're against a nit or you're against a good lag or you're against Phil IV or I don't care. Uh, those two things you want to try to size your bets so that you do both of them every single hand basically. What I mean by manipulating stack sizes is that this is often going to be true actually at 100 big blinds and less, because uh, like taking a certain line, betting like a bit bigger pre-flop or a bit bigger on the flop, or going like for pot on the flop at like, I don't know, from 30 to 100 big blinds is really often gonna dictate how the rest of the hand is gonna be played basically. Here I'm gonna try to barrel left on that board. My 2 overs. Uh, yeah, it's gonna dictate, like I said, how the rest of the hand is gonna be played, and you want to be able to calculate in your head. Let's say your opponent has like 70, 80 big blinds, and you have a plan from the flop. You want to accomplish something like, okay, I want to 3 barrel bluffs on most cards here, in most situations. So what I'm going to do is I'm gonna bet pretty small on the flop, so I keep his uh, range wider, and then bet pretty small again on the turn, and leave myself a pot-sized bet on the river, which I think is gonna leave me with the most fold equity on the river, which is my goal. Uh, in same kind of situation, but you are evaluating, you want to like bet, you'd like sometimes to bet a bit bigger on the flop, a bit bigger on the turn, so that he's left with like half the pot on the river, and then he has to call off his stack basically against someone who's gonna think that way. You basically want to induce a call down, so you're gonna manipulate uh, the stack sizes, your bet sizes to manipulate. I wrote the stack sizes, but it's also the size of the pot comparing to the stack of your opponent. So always keep that in mind. Basically, always keep that reason in mind too. Uh, to maximize value, when you're just value betting, basically, you want to bet the amount that is going to give you the most value. And this is something that is pretty often misunderstood. And I talk about it uh, quite a bit in a lot of my videos. Here, I'm pretty happy that he gave up. I don't know if I would have called a big bet on the river. I don't think so. And I don't think there's any merit in trying to value bet here. If I had a better kicker, if I had like King 10 or Ace 10, I would probably value bet the river, just because I look like a busted draw. And I could get called by a lot of like worse 10s that are gonna bet flop plus turn as well. But with my 8 kicker, I don't get called by worse. Not many worse hands got there by the river, so I don't get called by worse a lot. So I'm just gonna check back and hope that it's good. Could have called sometime with ace 5 here, but I think it is pretty unlikely. But then again, I don't know the tendencies on this player. I just know that he looks like he's playing pretty aggressively, like very aggressively. Uh, and he's on all 3 of my tables, so that should be interesting. Here, he could call with like ace high or an under pair on the flop. I mean, yeah, on the flop. So I think I do have some fold equity with a nice bet on the turn here. And I do have an open-ended in case I don't, so that's fine. Uh, coming back on my reasons, maximize value and maximize bluffs. Those are like level 1 thinking. Basically, you put your opponent on certain holding, and you either want him to call with like the biggest range of holdings basically because you're valuing, or you want him to fold as many hands as possible, so you're gonna vary your bet sizings. And a quick note on, yeah, I was talking about that, about maximizing value. Here I'm gonna go broke in the blinds for sure. He's just playing so aggressively. I probably won't fold that as well. um, Maximizing value is often a, well, I am gonna fold that. It's often a misunderstood concept, like I said, because you don't maximize value according to the strength of your hand. And like I said, I talked a bit about that in a couple of videos earlier. I can't remember which videos, but you have to maximize value according to your opponent's range of hand. Uh, if you have the nuts, you don't have to try to stack off your opponent, because if you're in a situation where your opponent, where you have the absolute nuts, but your opponent can't have a big end like ever. It's basically totally worthless, and it's like a mistake to go ahead and fire like pot and fire really big bets, uh, because you're not maximizing your value, just not even thinking most of the time and just hoping for the best and hoping that he calls down with I don't know what, basically. So you don't want to go with that thinking process. You want every single time you're playing a hand, basically, you want to assess the most precise range to your opponent as possible. And if you're able to do that, you will be able to understand like which hands you want your opponent to call with when you do certain value bets. And maximizing value can be going for stacks with like top pair weak kicker in certain precise situations, and not going for stacks basically in other situations. I would have fired the turn for sure here against such an unimaginative, yeah, he's not imaginative player as Yun Jong, which I've played some amount of hands against. Now with the ace getting there, I'm just gonna give up. I think not much I can do that could make him fold anything. Not many sizings I could take that couldn't make him fold anything there. And I'm out of here. I could shove, but not really. Uh, maximize bluffs, get as many folds as possible, and lay yourself the best price on your bluffs as well. That you always want to keep in mind. Like over betting is always fine, and not always fine actually, not at all, but is often the bet that is gonna get you the most folds. It's not always true because sometimes you do want to look like you're polarized or do some tricky stuff like that if you're in a pretty advanced thinking war. But most of the time, the bigger you bet, the more folds you get. But like there are situations, and most situations actually, uh, I have a hard time explaining it, but there's like a graph that's like you want to look for the optimal amount on which you get the most fold basically, and this amount is sometimes going to be a quarter of the pot, and it's sometimes going to be two times the pot, and you have to put that in relation to the fact that when you bet two times the pot, it costs you a lot every time you're wrong basically. So you want to be pretty sure that he's going to fold some very specific holdings that he has often when you go for like an overbet bluff and stuff like that. uh, I hope this is clear enough. Uh, and the last three reasons are gonna be reasons of mind game, and are gonna be reasons that are gonna be 100% dependent on your opponent, always, always, always. And I never put enough emphasis on that when I make my videos, but every play you make basically in poker is 100% on your dependent on your opponent, and that's why I don't like to just look at like hands that have been played or like theoretical hands that much, because there are so many factors to consider every single time that you can't put like every hand in the same boat basically. uh, and this is a good example. Like you want to sometimes go for like half the pot against certain players because you think it's gonna induce them into bluffing, into raising, and then stacking up, doing something weird. And you want to do exactly the same thing against another player, which could be just good enough as the first one, but it's just not gonna view like the half pot bet the same way as someone else would have viewed it, and he's gonna do something different with it. He could view it as stronger or whatever. I think you get my. Oh, this is pretty rare. Like the exact two same cards, exactly disposed, perfectly disposed. I'm gonna play both and win both. Uh, I just lost my thoughts. That was dumb. Uh, Here, I think peeling one is a mistake. Seriously, uh, I think it's the default play for a lot of players, but I think I win the hand so very not often that I can't make a flop call profitable there with like middle pair, no clubs, no an aggressive opponent who is likely to just fire out if he has any sort of equity on the turn, etc., etc. I think it's dumb to call one street. It's just giving away money. But yeah, those situations, and uh, just to give you a guideline in those situations, even though it's gonna be, like I said, dependent on who exactly you're playing against. Uh, like I said earlier, those reasons are often in an order of what you want to do, how you want to think, how far you're gonna think against bad players, and how far you want to think against good players when you are deciding on a certain bet sizing. And the fact is, I'm gonna dunk lead. Really prefer dunk leading here. Uh, the fact is, when you are as far and when you've played as many hands as I'm gonna talk about those sevens in no time. But yeah, when you've played so many hands that you're at some point that you want to balance your range against the player, uh, this usually means like when you are going to bet a certain amount to balance your range, this will also include all of those things, and balancing is going to include, like I said, every single one of those reasons. And this is a really sick spot, really, really sick spot. Just a sec. This is just dumb. Whatever. Well played, I guess. Yeah, indeed, it was well played. Uh, I could try to turn my hand into a bluff, but I think it's suicide. I think my better bet is just to check and hope he has two pairs and that he checks them back, basically. Uh, and he did have a strike, and I could have turned my hand into a bluff, but I don't know if I like the play because he could have a flush himself some percentage of the time. Those are two big bets, and he's probably gonna fire the river big as well. So I think I'm better off just giving up here. If I don't have any reason to believe my opponent is gonna bluff the river, and if I'm not like check calling the turn to check call the river, or check calling the turn with the knowing that my opponent most often gives up that kind of bluff on the river, I can check call the turn. But with no plan on the river and like not knowing if he's gonna fire or not on the river, and I'm just gonna save myself some money and fold on the turn right away. I'm gonna come back on that just before, and it probably will give me the time to uh, get my thinking clear. But yeah, I want to talk about that hand for sure. Pre-flop, pretty standard, obviously. On the flop, I prefer dunking here because of the stack size of this guy first. The fact that the original raiser, that guy is not likely to ever basically fire a C bet if he has nothing at all in there, so I don't lose like the money that I would have gotten from a C bet by dunk leading. And the fact that there are a lot of hands that either these two guys are gonna like check back very often that they could call a bet with something like 9-8, 7-8, ace-8 that I don't want to get outdrawn on any flush draw. any lot of things basically, and he's asking me in the video to tell him if he should value bet the river. I will get to that point. So I think dunk leading is more profitable here for sure. So I go ahead and do it. I get a call from that guy and a fold from there. Turn is a jack. I could check here. It's not a good card, of course, and I could check. But the problem with checking is that when I check any bets, I'm in deep shit, and I could get bluffed out from my hand by some flush draws if I check fold. And if I check call, I basically have exactly what I'm representing. So I won't get as much value when the river pairs if I'm against an 8. And finally, I think most players here are likely to. This is a really fun flop. Yeah, I'm gonna take the check raise route. I think this guy c bets quite often. uh, I don't know if I actually have to call that. I really don't know against that kind of player. I have never played against that guy. He just made the dumbest shit with his ace-10 earlier. That's my only info. Well, I think with the stack sizes and the pot size, I can just check shove so many hands profitably on the flop if he has any sort of uh, bluffing range pre-flop that my play is gonna be good. Now, no need in like check shoving. I'm just gonna check call and hope that there are some bluffs in his range when I check again on the turn, basically. I just can't fold ever, I think. Even though it's so weird with the 6 getting there. I actually have to shove, I think, because he could fold some better hands sometimes with the 4 straight getting there. Instead of just check calling down, I'm gonna shove the turn and hope that he sometimes fold a big hand. This is really weird, really weird play. But this is pretty specific to that guy being like a half stack from Spain who looks like he's just clicking buttons. But yeah, coming back on my sevens, by betting the turn, I think we get a lot of calls from 2 pairs on the turn that he could have. I think he's calling the flop with Jack 10 and Jack 9 pretty much always, and I think he's gonna call the turn again with Jack 10 and Jack 9. And if I check, I'm just losing value from both of these hands. Other thing is that I think my opponent most of the time is not gonna raise me with an 8 there. If you think that you're against someone that who's just gonna like shove you when they have an 8, it's not that big of a disaster, but you do want to be able to try to draw out on him. So betting the turn becomes a bit less good. That's a minus for betting the turn. But when you're against someone who's calling with an 8 most of the time, just to like balance his range and hope I'm bluffing some rivers, and just don't tell me that he has an egg basically. Betting is better. So I get value out of 2 pairs, out of some flush draw plus pair type of hands too. Like Jack X of spades that he could have, 7X of spades as well as possible. And like if the river pairs the board, he's likely to call another big bet with an 8. So with all that factored in, I think betting is better on the turn than he calls. And the river is really tricky. Because when he calls the turn, I think most of his range is like... I went pretty big on the turn, actually. And I think his range is basically 8x. Like any 8 that decided to call the flop is obviously going to call the turn. Some flush draws, but not that many. Yeah, I think that there are actually quite a few flush draws because every Queen X flush draw is calling the turn for sure with an open. Any Jack X flush draw as well. Any 8x flush draw is gonna play that for sure as well. And probably even the Ace X flush draw because he has a nut flush draw. So there are a lot of flushes possible for him there. So I mean, my options here are definitely between check folding and trying to turn my hand into a bluff. There's no merit whatsoever in ever check calling unless you think that your opponent is gonna turn 2 pairs into a bluff here. But it could be good on his part if I check the river, because when I check the river, I really don't have the flush really often, and when he shoves the river, I have to put him on the flush pretty often, so he could make me fold out of his range, uh, but it's not that likely. And I decided to check just because I think that on that exact board there are too many possible flushes for him, and I'm not even sure if he's folding any sort of straight. If he's folding 8x, he has to fold 8x, I think, if I shove. But it's kind of suicidal when I don't have any info on whether he's gonna actually do it or not. Uh, and he asked, do I have to value bet the river? The answer is a big fucking no. Of course you don't have to value bet the river. What in the fuck you want me to call you with there? Uh, I mean, with the flush getting there, there's absolutely no way that you're gonna get any sort of value uh, with your egg, naked egg there. The funny thing though is that play that one. You actually have to shove the river. I think. I really think so. Uh, but it is as a bluff. It is to bluff me out of every split pot and bluff me out of Queen X. I think shoving the river becomes good. I don't have Queen X that often. I think I really, really rarely have a flush when I check the river. Pretty much, like, I pretty much never have a flush when I check the river because I'm gonna bet all my flushes so like my opponent doesn't check back with 8x, which is a very big part of his range. So if you're a good enough hand reader to realize that I pretty much never have the flush, I pretty rarely have Queen X here. I think you have to shove the river just to make me fold all of my Queen X and make me fold out my split pots because I have to fold both of those. Unless you think that I am gonna put you on like two pairs that is turning his hand into a bluff. When you shove the river, I have to put you on a flush there. And this is a clear spot where I think turning your hand into a bluff is gonna be profitable. It looks fucking tricky, but I think it's the best way to play the hand. So all in all, I think if my opponent shoves the river there, he plays absolutely perfectly that hand. Uh, and it's funny to think that it's actually two as a bluff that he's gonna do it, and he thought about doing it for value, but there's definitely no value to be gained there. So I hope that this hand was pretty clear because it's very interesting hand, and if anyone else wants to discuss it again uh, in the forums or anything like that, just make a sign and we will discuss it. Coming back on that, I don't think anything else so important happened. But yeah, coming back on all that, where was I? I think I was talking about how balancing implies pretty much everything else in itself. When you're balancing your range, it's because you like when you're value betting, you're balancing because you want to maximize value, because you don't want to get exploited, because you want like your opponent, you want to induce your opponent in calling you down with some other stuff because you're balancing with all your bluffs in your range and you want to present every time you have a bluff as well. So like I said for like the fifth time, it's all in order. And you have to know when you are deciding on some bet sizings where to stop basically. On which level you want to stop and you want to exploit your opponent. Sometimes balance goes out the window because you're gonna be facing such tricky spots that arise so not often, basically, that you don't care about balancing. You don't have to be balanced in that kind of spot. Uh, you just want to play the exact situation that just arose in your face. And this is a kind of spot where you're gonna bet really weird amounts. You're gonna overbet, you're gonna underbet. to induce some things or to represent some things because you think your opponent is going to view it as some way, or to maximize any of those. And when you think about it, you forget what you wanted to say. But I hope I basically just made it clear that all of those reasons are the reasons why you want to switch your bet sizing. I'm kind of sad so far because I did not get any chance to talk about bet sizing. There's actually not much happening aside from that really interesting hand that I just talked about. The rest is pretty calm. I did get that hand, and this is a hand. I think there's a reason that I did not include in there, uh, and I'm gonna explain it why I want to vary my bet sizings. This is the hand. I raised my usual 4x on the small blind. I don't have a clue who's that guy on the big blind, but he just sat with 100 big blind, and he looks like he has a nickname of a regular. It's pretty basic as far as reads go. But yeah, I'm gonna assume that is a regular when he has that kind of nickname, actually, for some reasons. Uh, on that flop, I think this is kind of flop. First, I've never played against that player, so I really don't have to think about having to be balanced there. So that goes out the window. What I want to do, I flop the nuts. I have no history with the guy, so I don't know what I'm gonna be able to represent. I don't know what I'm gonna induce. All I want to do is maximize my value here. It's the only single thing that I want to do basically. Everything else, since I don't have any info, is out of the window. So the way to maximize value here and the info that I have on that particular player is the board texture basically. And what is he going to call with? And are there a lot of hands that are gonna call that would not call a big bet that are gonna call a small bet? And is it profitable to bet smaller so I don't build like a big pot, but I get a lot of calls from weaker hands? I decided that no, because I decided that on that flop, most of the time, if someone decides that he's gonna peel like one street, he's gonna do it, no matter how much I bet, unless I bet something like really ridiculous, like 8 or 12. He's gonna call with weaker hands, but the problem there is that I don't build a big enough pot. And since I don't know the guy, I can't tell that, okay, I'm gonna bet that amount to induce him into raising and then trying to go broke, which would be my way of maximizing value if I was against someone who raises my small bets quite a lot and I have such a dynamic against that specific opponent. But I can't say any of those things because I don't have any dynamic. Plus, I think that I don't have to be balanced. Plus, I think that the bigger I bet, the like just the bigger pot I'm gonna build, and he's not gonna fold any like strong hands that he would have called uh, with if I had bet smaller. I'm debating whether I'm gonna rebet the river on table one, and my answer is probably because there are a lot of like combo. Sorry, this microphone is shit. I have to switch it. Okay, yeah, there are a lot of pair plus combo, and I definitely want to bet when the other guy calls as well. Uh, I think I'm gonna go pretty big actually because I just look stronger, and this guy can't hero call as much, and it's basically a hero call if he calls with like 9x. He's gonna have like 6-7, 6-8, uh, 6-4. The 5 does give him some trips, but it's not that likely. And this guy, since he checked back the flop, I mean, he's not that strong ever, I think, and he's likely to fold. And I can represent some big hands, and I do want to represent a big hand here, which is why I bet pretty big. I'm gonna come back on that bet sizing actually. But yeah, coming back on that one, when I go over all, you have to go over all of those things, all of those reasons. You have to go over them as quickly as possible. And I did that when I decided on, I was debating on how much to bet on the flop. I came to the conclusion that my best way of maximizing value, because I have to stop there in my thinking process, given that I have no history basically, is to go for a big bet and try to go big, 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 and hope that he calls me down with like ace-x, because ace-x is certainly not gonna fall to like two street, especially ace-x with a heart. It's gonna call at least two streets, and then there's gonna be a big pot on the river, so I can get away with a lot of value with only like a half pot bet and stuff like that when I go big right away on the flop. So I decided to go big, pretty big on the turn again. Not too big on the turn. I don't want to carry in with like some of his a6s, but big enough, and he decided to fold the turn. But this is really important, and the thing is, since I have no history against that guy and I don't have to be balanced, when I'm just bluffing on that flop, uh, I'm going a lot smarter than 24. I'm going like half pot 16 here, because I have no reason to believe that it's gonna change his calling range, and it just gives me a better price on my bluff. I just have to hope that he has nothing at all, basically, when I'm bluffing here. So if I'm against someone against who I'm playing every single day, I basically have to go for my standard amount here all the time, because I have to be balanced, which would be like 20. But when I'm not against someone against who I have to be balanced, like that guy, I'm going with 24 for value and 16 as a bluff. And this is going to be true very, very often in other spots as well. When you don't want to, when you don't have to be balanced, you can go a bit bigger for value and a bit smaller as a bluff. You don't want to be too transparent against players that are capable of thinking, because there are a lot of spots where it's really, really, even if you don't have any history, it's really transparent that you have a big hand when you just like putt, putt, and putt. But there are situations like this one that I think it's good to be betting big for value and small as a bluff. So I hope this one is pretty clear as far as bet sizing goes. The other one, which table was it? Yeah, that was my bluff with ace queen. Pre-flop is standard, I think, once again. No read on either of these guys. I have like 22 and 54 hands on each. I think Tree of Life is, I think both are reg actually. They're pretty, probably both regulars. Uh, but as far as anything else goes, I don't have a clue how they play. So I'm gonna assume that they're normal 2-4 regulars. Uh, I'm just gonna sweeten the pot here, not bet too big, so I do want to be able to call if someone three bets and like this guy calls again and we build a big pot and I can set mine against a fish. But I do want to sweeten the pot and try to flop a set, which I did not do. I would have limped back probably if we were both only 100 big blinds deep, but when I'm well over 100 big blinds deep, I think I'm better off trying to build a bit of a bigger pot here. I don't get why this guy is min re-raising. I don't know if he's a reg in the end, but I don't have any more options than a call here, and this is where that he checks. I don't want to get myself into too much trouble without knowing what the hell he could have, and without any equity with my hand, I'm just gonna give that one up. But yeah, my ace queen, I decided to check the flop. I could lead just for bluff purposes, but I decided not to do so because I just didn't feel like it. Turn is a 9. I think I have to bet close to always here. First, I do have to over cards. If I had like nothing at all with no draw, which is basically impossible on that flop, so never mind. But I do have two overcards that are very likely to be live. What does he have? Well, that is weird. Maybe probably misclick pre-flop. I don't get it. But yeah, and in that situation where this guy is likely to have nothing at all when he checks back, very often. And this like you represent a pretty big hand because you could have tried to check raise a flop, and you're three away, so you look a lot stronger. And this guy is like in a sandwich, and this guy is most likely to have pretty much nothing at all. I think it's a pretty easy bet, and it is a spot where, as far as sizing goes, you don't need to bet that big because you're basically relying your bluff on the fact that both players are too weak to ever call. So you don't want them to fold big ends. You just want them to fold the widest possible part of their range, which is air quite a lot, if that makes any sense. So you don't have to go too big. You don't want to go too small as well, so that it's so transparent that you're bluffing, because you would obviously go at least like for a decent sizing on the turn with any sort of made hand here under normal circumstances. So I think 28 accomplishes everything there. It's balanced with my sizing of my value. I think this is spot, even though I don't have much history, I do have to be somewhat balanced. Because if I bet like $8, there's no way, if I'm against any sort of thinking players, that I'm gonna be able to represent something big by the river if I do have to. So I do want to keep a lot of things in my range. I do want to represent a lot of things, uh, and I want to maximize my bluff. So I don't need to bet too big here. So another spot where I really don't need to bet big. I don't have to bet go for like 20. I think I'm gonna just, for demonstration purposes, I'm gonna bet 12 because he checked so fast on like flop comes Jack 9 3 with a flush draw. He insta checks. Most of the time this is a give up. This is totally a give up from the original raiser. Because if he's at least like checking middle pair or Jack X for some reasons that are often going to be good, but uh, he's going to take at least some time to think about it. If he has Jack 10 and he decides to check it, or like 9x, he's going to take at least a couple of seconds, I think. Now he just insta checks, so in my mind he has nothing at all. I just don't want to get outdrawn by his nothing at all, even though I have the best hand most of the time. I think I'm better off just winning the pot right there. And I think since he has nothing, and I don't think that particular player is gonna go mad and like check raise me when I bet something stupid, uh, I just don't need to bet big here ever. I don't even need to be balanced, because even if I'm in balance when I bet small, because I only bet that small as a bluff probably here, uh, I know this guy is not gonna exploit it. So you have to be aware that balance is good sometimes, but there are spots where you don't even have to think about being balanced, because your opponents are not gonna exploit your unbalances basically. Uh, so yeah, and I was talking about hand before that one. Yeah, my ace queen. I'm gonna come back on it. So I go with all the reasons that I've mentioned. I go for 28 on the turn, which I think is the best sizing. This guy calls. By the time that this guy calls, I was, like I said, debating whether I would have fired the river again here. Uh, I was leaning towards yes, even though it's pretty close, because he's probably not folding 9x. Just like, let's say the river is a total brick. Let's say the river is like, I don't know, a jack here. He's not folding 9x that often, I think, just because there are so many draws that I've missed. If he knows me, he certainly is not folding 9x. If he does not know me, he's more likely to fold it, but it would be pretty close. But still, he has like a lot of flush draws still in his range. Stuff like 6x, 6-7, 6-8 suited that he's gonna fold for sure. 5-4 that he's gonna fold. What's their problem? Is that another guy? Yeah. So okay, there's like a team of Spain guys who shove over him in race as a squeeze with anything. This is funny. This is this is nice to see actually. This is gonna be good for the games. It's so bad. Uh, But yeah, I was leaning towards firing again on the river and to make him fold all of his like pair plus draws or only draws and stuff like that. And I did not expect that guy to call. But with that guy calling, I prefer actually a bet on the river than if I was only heads up because I'm just representing more hands here. And now, how much do I want to bet? The problem here, if I go with too small of a bet, of course it's gonna cost me a lot less for the times that my opponent decides to hero call me. Like every time the guy has 9x like I was talking about and he decides to hero call me, or it's gonna cost me a lot less every time he has 5x and river trips and he's not folding those. I exclude any straight and any set from my opponent's range there because they're never playing ever, I think, a set or a straight like that, both of them actually. So that's a good thing to know. So given the fact that they can't really be really big here unless they have like 4-5 suited, 5-7 suited for the big blind, and the under the gun can't really have a 5 as well because he raised from under the gun. So those being very not likely hands, I'm very rarely against a big hand. So I want to, like I was talking about earlier, uh, maximize my bluff here and bet the right amount so that there are enough hands that fold that would call a smaller amount, but not too much so it doesn't cost me too much when my bluff does not get through basically. And I think something close to pot here is really good because I can have a really big hand and I'm betting something close to pot here to represent a big hand because that's what I would do with a good hand. That's what someone normal would do under normal circumstances here. And I think that both my opponents are viewing me as someone normal under normal circumstances. So I think this is my best shot at representing something big. It's not always going to be my best shot at representing something big. Uh, let's say if I'm against players that I have a lot more history with there. I think someone who is such a good hand reader that he knows that in his own range there are not that many hands that can call like a big bet here. Uh, so when I bet big, I'm more likely to be trying to get some folds from my opponents than I'm likely to be trying to get value out of my opponent's possible range. So betting smaller could be more maximal here. But this is not the case. This is a case of normal circumstances against players that I don't have that much history to be thinking that kind of stuff. And those spots are gonna rise. Believe me, it's gonna be some thinking war that is gonna rise. The other thing that I was talking about, but in that spot, I think my best shot at representing and maximizing my bluff here is to go big. And once again, I had to go through all of these things as quickly as possible and get the biggest reasons, the more important reasons here. I want to be balanced with my big hands. I want to maximize my bluffs and I want to represent something big. And I think the best way against those two players was to go big. And so they fold any like one pair that could hero call otherwise because all of the draws have missed. And I do have a really good bluffing spot. But I don't think they're good enough to realize all of those things. I think when I bet big, your standard 2-4 regular is more likely to just go, oh, he's going for pretty big. I think he's more likely to be going for value here, so I'm just gonna fold. So he folds and I win a decent size spot. But sizing was important here to maximize my play, and I think I sized both my turn and river bets pretty much perfectly. So, yep, that was an interesting one. I like those. In your face, you John. I'm gonna go ahead and. Oh, fuck that guy. I really don't like set mining here. I was thinking about for a bit bluffing and then seeing what happens, but I just decided that I don't feel like it. I just don't want to do it for no reason. Uh, so I think I've gone through all of this. I think I got some pretty good example on what you have to think about basically when you are debating whether to go for certain bite sizes or other bit sizes or whatever. So I'm happy with that video. And if you have any question from for the rest of the series, I'm more likely to go ahead and start looking at actual hands. And if you have actually hands that you're not sure about your bet sizes, spots where you don't know if it's good to overbet, if it's a good overbet spot, if it's a good underbet spot, or stuff like that, send them to me, please. I'm gonna put an announcement in my blog, I think, to go out and look for some hand stories that I'm gonna be able to work with to continue with this series. But I did want to make another theoretical general theory video so you get all the reasonings behind the bet sizing dynamic, so you're gonna be well prepared for when the practice part comes into play. And when you practice yourself, always go through this kind of stuff. And the more you do you do it, and the more you concentrate on that kind of stuff when you are playing, the more it's gonna come pretty fast. I know that if you're not used to playing with your bet sizing, which I do quite a lot, especially against people that I don't have to balance my range that much against. I do it all the time against unknowns, playing with my bet sizes, going a bit bigger, a bit smaller for some metagame reasons or stuff like that. Do it, do it. Practice yourself doing it. Practice yourself. Why am I doing it? Is it good against that player? Uh, all those things. Practice, like I said, practice. Think while you do it, and you'll will become really good at it in no time, and it's gonna be a very important weapon in your arsenal, in your playing arsenal. So hope you enjoyed the video. This was Martin Jiggy for Size Does Matter Part 2. I'm gonna play that hand and I'm gonna leave. Actually, I'm gonna leave. I'm gonna finish my one last turn of the table turn. Yay! So we will get to the button, to all of my buttons. No, yeah, no, under the guns. Oh, this one is from Denmark. I hope that he's as dumb as the other guys who are just shoving over like with like how many big blinds is that? It's like a lot. It's a lot. It is way too much to shove over a squeeze at a min raise, Mr. Dumb Spaniards. I can't get over the fact that those dumb fucks are doing such a short stack strategy. Looks like actually. It's gonna be fun if those guy, guy like this starts playing like that a lot because it's so exploitable and a lot of people don't exploit it. I might make a video on that, on exploiting that kind of players with that many big blinds. But as a general rule of thumb, you want to size really small against those players, and they're gonna do it if they're good. You want to like min 3-bet people just because they're gonna be making so many mistakes when you do it, like you tried to do to me on my 7-8 and early in the session. I don't remember if it was that guy, but I'm gonna assume he's just playing exactly the same way that the guy who did that to me was playing. Yeah, anyway, I hope you remember it. Well, general rule of thumb, you want to bet really small against those guys. Size really small, uh, even post flop because of his stack sizes. You don't ever need to go big because don't even need to bet remotely close to pot to to build a big enough pot so that like you're gonna live with bet pot on the river or something like that. I'm actually not making that much sense right now because in my mind I had already finished the video. So I'm actually gonna finish it right now before I lose my credibility. Bye.